Hi everybody, I'm Suzette Martinez Standring and welcome to It's All Right with Suzette, where we'll spend the next half hour talking about the craft of writing. And my special guest today is author Ben Robertson, who has written a new book, a very exciting young adult novel entitled The Last Generation. And it features the heroine, Bridget Thorsdottir, a 17-year-old girl who, amid the turmoil of Greenland in 1501, goes through the challenges of persecution and prejudice and starts her journey to the new world. I've really enjoyed this book, and today Ben Robertson is here to talk to us about this great new novel.
Thank you, Suzette.
And thanks for driving all the way from Keene, New Hampshire.
Yep.
And could you please tell us more about your book?
Sure. So the Last Generation is set in Greenland in the year 1501. And it's at a time when the Greenland had been settled by the Norse people from places like Norway and Denmark and Sweden and Iceland. And they settled there in about the year 1000. But sometime between 1450 and 1500, the Norse people disappeared from Greenland, and nobody knows what happened to them to this day. And so this is a story of what might have happened to them and how they might have ended up leaving Greenland through the eyes of a 17-year-old girl.
Well, I thought it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed the book. Now, there are undercurrents of prejudice because Bridget Thorsdottir is half Inuit, and there are elements of religious persecution. Can you talk about those, how those factors played into the story?
Well, it actually grew out of my interest. It's a historical novel.
Yes.
And I was very interested in capturing the lives of all the people that were living there at the time. And I also wanted to have a sense of the fullness of the community, so that it wasn't just one piece of it, but that it included everybody who was there, because the Inuit were there before the Norse. And I was very, very interested in their experience of that place as well. So Bridget's identity as half Inuit and half Norse is, I think, very New World. But it was also my sort of device as an author to be able to explore more of the world in interesting ways.
I really loved it. I found the book to be very exciting. It had that flavor of the Hunger Games in a way that the heroine is very courageous. Talk to us a little bit about the personality of Bridget Thorsdottir.
Well, I personally have been very inspired by strong female characters for a long time, and particularly, actually, interestingly enough, in the Hong Kong and Chinese cinema. So characters like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and Iron Monkey, where they have these very strong martial arts fighting girls, have always just been really inspiring to me. I kind of tear up sometimes when I watch these movies in their big fight scenes, you know, when they come out with a sword and they say, you know, I challenge you to, you know, to my sword, taste my sword. And I would watch these movies, so I just thought, God, I'd love to write a character like that. You know, it just is, it's a kind of character that I've always found very fun to watch. And so when I, you know, was sitting down to think about my own novel, I was immediately drawn to that type of character. And of course, the Hunger Games is that in American culture, and I am deeply impressed by the work of Suzanne Collins, and have really enjoyed reading those books and the movies. So, you know, and I like the fact that we're at a point where a lot of this type of girls who can get out there and do things and, you know, be hunters, you know, bow hunting has increases an interesting topic for a lot of girls just in the culture because of the Hunger Games. And I love that kind of thing, that kind of survivalism and living off of the land and hunting and that sort of thing. So I just thought, well, you know, what a great time to have a character that kind of fits with what's going on in the culture, where people are interested in this sort of thing. And it fits with my own interests.
And what I also loved, all the way, it has the flavor of the Hunger Games, the Mockingjay. You know, Bridget Thorsdottir is a very unique character. The book itself has its own very unique imprint in style and in the way you paint such a vivid picture of the Norse people in 1501 in Greenland.
Yeah.
And also, one of the points of friction or tension or conflict is this bishop.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, you know, the politics that are involved in the movie? I mean, in the movie. See, that was, maybe it's prophetic. It could be prophetic in your book.
So when I watched the Hunger Games, you know, this whole interest in dystopian young adult fiction that's going on right now with like Divergent and the Hunger Games, it's all set in the future. And that's the hallmark of dystopian fiction ever since George Orwell with 1984, and even before that with Brave New World. So, but I thought to myself, you know, we're talking about the present when we talk about the future, and you know, the Hunger Games is clearly an allegory. And so I thought to myself, well, wouldn't it be interesting to go back to the past and see how these things have played out in the past when the future was now, you know, but we're going back to a historical time and seeing how people were dealing with certain issues. So obviously, you know, we're talking about the onset of the Reformation, the Borgia popes.
Yeah.
You know, at the end of the end of the 15th century, the Borgia popes were very corrupt, and it was sort of what set the stage for Martin Luther. There was this whole interest in eschatology, which is the study of the end of times. There was tons and tons of writing around that. Who was the monk Norse who was burned at the stake by the Borgia Pope? But you know, they were all talking. There are a lot of the things that were happening in the year around 1500 have been happening now. I mean, it's not so different.
True.
And so I said, well, it's interesting to have this allegory about the future and kind of set it all up. But I'm kind of interested in the past because it's real, and for me, it was a very interesting learning opportunity. So, you know, Bishop Rollo, who has taken over the colony, basically, you know, he's a rogue, and he's seen what's happened. You know, they had pirates that became popes in the 15th century, and the Medici set these guys up, and the Medicis became the wealthiest banking family in Europe by collecting all the tithes for the church. And so this guy, you know, Bishop Rollo Magnusson is his name, he basically said, you know, everybody's doing it. You know, it's a big world. There's a lot of opportunity. Why not me? You know, why can't I go make my own thing? And so he goes to Greenland. He's actually an imposter, although that's not even mentioned in the book. He's not really a bishop. And he meets Barton Andrews, who's a Scottish merchant, who sets him up with their financiers out of Bristol, England, which was the center of the slave trade later, but one of the major British trading ports. And the British gold of the day was codfish. And so between Barton Andrews and Bishop Rollo, they just said, look, this is a great business opportunity. Iceland is fished out. We got Newfoundland. Greenland is in the middle. Let's make a business out of this, and we'll make a ton of money. And so that's how they ended up showing up there. And then they turn on all the people and they say, look, you can all live a much better life if you join us and do this thing.
Now, when you were doing the research for your book, I mean, all these elements, these fascinating elements of the times, you know, the religious persecution, the greed, the corruption, all of that was happening at the time in the 15th century. Were you, or rather, I guess the 14th century?
Well, now I got real good at that one. So it's 15th century. It's really, we're in the 16th century because 1501, but it's really the end of the 15th century. Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you created these characters, Bishop Rollo and all of that, were there actual historical figures that you sort of patterned them after, or did you take the happenings of the time and create these characters?
Well, both. So I looked at Kirsten Sievers has written some really wonderful, wonderful histories of the Greenland Norse. One is called The Frozen Echo, and then the other one is called The Last Vikings. I actually preferred The Frozen Echo in a lot of ways. She set up the scenarios and really set up the historical context in those books in a very informative way. And a lot of her work was based on the research of a wonderful researcher at the Danish National Museum who's Jette Arneborg. And so I looked at what they had set up, and I just said, and I looked at the history of Europe and what was happening at the time. So I didn't really, I did think vaguely about, there are people who are doing this, but then I made up my own characters, and then I kind of picked and chose on context as far as, would this be possible? And my real concern was not so much veracity, but plausibility, because nobody really knows what happened. So I wanted to just be able to say, is it plausible? And not this is what happened, but it's what could have happened. And then I picked what I thought was the most interesting, fun kind of story of possible, choices that were within the range of possibility.
Because Bishop Rollo wants to turn the farmers, take over the farming industry and change it into a more lucrative fishing village.
Yes.
And therefore, that's how it starts. And he uses the vehicle of religious persecution to root out the people who are rebelling and not necessarily going along with his plan.
Exactly.
And Bridget, her father, Thor, rebels against all of that. And you've got some really exciting scenes and some very disturbing things that go on in the persecution of her dad. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there again, I was very interested in the transition from the Norse religion to the Christian religion, which really started in the year 1000. But, excuse me, it wasn't until later, it was a slow transition. And I was also interested in the way that religious leaders are able to use religion as a way to divide and conquer. And so, I felt like Bishop Rollo was, was able to. I've kind of lost my train here, but Thor's persecution was also, in the same way that I chose Bridget's Inuit connection. I chose Thor's persecution in the context of that as a way to discuss in an entertaining way this issue of the transition from the Norse to the Christian religion and how it still wasn't done. And these types of persecutions were inspired by real events in Iceland. Iceland is our best historical corollary because Iceland has a continuous historical history which in writing and particularly through this period. It's one of the richest treasure troves of medieval literature in the world is in Iceland, in the Icelandic sagas.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's Reykjavik is the UNESCO World Literature City. And so all of these conflicts between the fishermen and the farmers happen in Iceland. This issue of the landowners owning, 1 out of 100 people owning land happened in Iceland. That same ratio existed. And I would go and check with Jette Arneborg at the Danish National Museum and people that she works with, and I would say, is this plausible? Does this make sense? Are these the right ratios? This is what I'm coming up with. Because I was very concerned that my numbers worked out and that, I didn't dwell on the data, but I have an economics background, and I wanted to make sure that the economic and financial and business and historical context were true, because when I read stuff and see stuff that's not that way, I get very irritated.
Right.
And I want it to be accurate. So I made a point of I didn't want to dwell on it, because I get it. Like, you don't want to, it's not a history book. It's entertainment.
It's very entertaining.
But when it's in there, it is to the best of my ability. And if anybody can find errors, I would, I delight in knowing what they are, because I can make changes. But I even went on, so Thor's big event where he brings in the Norse religion and all that stuff.
Yes.
I actually consulted with a young PhD candidate, Tim Carlson, in Edinburgh, Scotland, who's studying with one of the foremost experts on Arctic shamanism in the world. And I sent him those chapters, and I said, look, this is what I have. I found you, and I see you do this stuff. And I said, this is what I imagined. And I'm curious if you think it sounds plausible. And he's like, absolutely. He says, great. I love the fact that you said Thor and Freya,
That's fantastic.
And all that stuff. So as much as I could, I would go and check with people that I could find, and they were extremely helpful. Henk de Velde in Amsterdam has sailed the world 6 times. He's a solo globe sailor, and he was extremely helpful in reading my descriptions of you know, sailing and kayaking and all that stuff and just saying yes, no, and where the currents would be, where the winds would be. I mean, these are things that would just be so hard to know without being able to talk to somebody.
Absolutely. And I think all of those elements of realism were really well captured in your book.
Well, thank you.
And you know, in a moment, we're going to return to Ben Robertson and about his new book, The Last Generation. And we're going to talk about his very fascinating writing process, because I know it took you 1.5 years to complete this book. But we're going to take a break right now. And when we return, we'll be talking to Ben Robertson. So stay tuned. Back with Ben Robertson, the author of The Last Generation. And you know, what I loved about your book is that not only did you paint a very vivid picture of the Norse people and the conflicts they had in Greenland in 1501, but you also captured their way of speaking. And I think that language has a way of really taking you back and putting you in the center of the story. And we had an interesting conversation about etymology and how you researched words that were actually used at that time.
Yeah.
So can you talk about how you use language to get into the character of Bridget?
Well, so I feel that language is a really important part of how we see the world. And the vocabulary that we have available to us is the software of how we understand the world around us. And so I you know, the hard part about these going back into historical periods is really understanding how those people saw themselves and saw the world around them. And my way of getting to that was through language. So what I did was I was very disciplined and spent a lot of time actually researching and making sure that the language that I used was language or words that would have existed at that time, or could possibly have existed at that time. So I gave myself a little bit of leeway because nobody totally knows. You know, the study of etymology is basically the history of words and the origin of words. So it's looking at, you know, did this word exist in writing so we can prove that it existed? But obviously the oral tradition is very different and vast and unknown because it changed so much. But what we have as modern English is basically Shakespeare, which is like, you know, late 16th century, and that solidified, you know, the King James Bible and Shakespeare solidified what we think of as modern English. So when you go back to 1501, you're in a little bit of a vaguer period. You know, we're post-Gutenberg Bible, so we have the printed word, we have writing, but we don't have as thorough a record of what the language was at that time. So I didn't want to get into a lot of archaisms of I definitely did not want to do stereotypical archaic language.
Right.
And what I found when I started, my natural inclination was to do the phrases that I found out were actually 17th century and not 15th century. And then I would find you know, that the 15th century words are much more modern and interesting in ways that I didn't even expect. And I think one of the things that it gave me a window onto is that the end of the Middle Ages really was the beginning of the modern era and the beginning of the modern world. And the words that I used, when I found words that I did not think were, like you used the example of wow.
Exactly. I saw the word wow in the book. That jumped out at me,
right.
And I thought, did that exist in 1501?
Yeah.
And you said it did.
Right, and I was utterly surprised. I found out that other words did not exist at that time. And like, for example, the word plan. I just thought, everybody plans. What would you do if you couldn't plan? I used the word plan probably 50 or 60 times in there and had to take them all out and think about how else did this happen? And it was also interesting because it made me, you know, instead of reverting to my shorthand for communication, which is my own vocabulary, I started to have to think about what's really going on here. How is she doing it? If I can't use the word plan.
Yeah, what did you use?
I think I just, you know, she'd be in the those hot spring.
Yeah.
And she'd be thinking about, what am I going to do? How am I going to? It was just like she would just be going through in her head
Right.
planning, but I couldn't say plan.
Because that word didn't exist.
Because the word
then.
didn't exist, and it's related to technology. And what I found out, which was kind of interesting, but maybe to the side, but that it's basically related to the plans for buildings and the schematics. But they didn't really have them yet, and so they didn't use it that commonly. I think that's the reason why it didn't exist so much.
Oh, that's interesting.
One word that I did cheat on, I used the word hallway, when she's in the palace.
Yes.
And that word did not exist. The word corridor did not exist. The word passage did not exist in the way that we use them as through a house. So I cheated on that and just used hallway, because if I'd used the word that I wanted to use, which is alley, which is actually the word they use to describe what we call a hallway now, nobody would have understood it. It would have just been confusing every time somebody read it. So it's 99% good, and then there's 1% where I allowed myself some leeway just to not confuse people and make it, legitimate. Slope is another one. I use can't. That's in the first paragraph.
I saw that.
C-A-N-T. And I didn't know that word. It's a Scottish word. But I use slope a bunch because there are a bunch of slopes in Greenland, right? All these mountains and, right, the fjords and everything. So I was like, but you can't use it, so you got to use can't.
You have a very rich background in art and in adventure, because I know you've lived in different places.
Sure.
The Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky, Lower Manhattan, throughout New England, and you've lived abroad. I understand that after you graduated from high school that you took Chinese and Fudan University in Shanghai. So language plays a very big part in your life. And you were actually an interpreter for CNN during the protests in Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, 1989.
So it's really fascinating. And so how did you bring this very diverse background into writing this particular kind of book?
Well, I think being bilingual in English and Chinese did, that's part of what taught me so much about how language shapes our view of the world. And it also gave me a great deal of insight. The Inuit I was an East Asian Studies major in college. So, and I lived in China for 6 years, studied at Beijing Normal University, Fudan University, lived in Taipei for 5 years. And the Chinese worldview is so different from the American or Western worldview in so many ways. And you don't really get introduced to it until you start to speak the language. And I had moments when I was a very young student of just being lost in the Chinese world of language, when I separated and feeling very adrift and having a really major culture shock coming back into my own culture when I returned. And that experience of going back and forth between two cultures, I think is part of what made me interested in exploring the Inuit culture, the Norse culture, and finding a way to, and feeling comfortable that it was possible. That I'd had that experience myself, so I felt like I know what that's like. I mean, I don't know the Inuit people, I don't know the Norse people, but I know what it was like to be an American in China, in the 80s and the 90s. and that was weird.
So much through their use of language.
Yeah, and the language was it. I mean, it was the language was everything. So I think that it has a lot to do with why I knew that the language was going to be my way to get into her worldview in a way that I felt was somewhat authentic and plausible.
I love the cover of your book, The Last
Thank
Generation,
you.
and I understand that you can purchase it on Amazon.com?
Yeah, that would be the best place to get it right now.
And what is your website?
I am at benhrobertson.com, and you can find me at www.benhrobertson.com is the best way to find my website, where I do have a blog and some more information about myself and information on how to get the book. You
said you had an interesting story about the design of this book.
Well, right. So very quickly, Randall Hoyt, who's a local professor in Keene, got his MFA at Yale, which I found out is one of the oldest design programs in the country. Oh. Wonderful sense of style and taste, and he did the cover, which I'm thrilled with. It's a freehand watercolor, and it really captures all of the themes of the story in an amazing way. I was just so impressed. This is really his first draft. I mean, he just did that, and we pretty much stuck with it. And then he also coached me on, I ended up doing my own interior design. So in my interest of keeping with this 15th century theme, the fonts that I chose, Adobe Garamond and Adobe Trajan, are both have their roots in 15th century Florence and Venice.
Wow.
Yeah, so they're authentic to the time. And also the text block here is designed according to the golden ratio, which is 1 to 1.61, 3 infinity. It goes on and never ends. But what I found out was that the medieval scribes, when they were doing illuminated manuscripts, believed that the golden ratio, this ratio of length to width of 1 to 1.61, was the most aesthetically pleasing ratio that a person could possibly look at. And so this text block is in that ratio as well, which is also very medieval.
Aspiring authors take note. Wow, that is deep research.
Yeah. So, and that was the fun part of, like, when I actually got into, I was forced to design the book myself, and I ended up getting, learning a lot actually in doing it.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. Well, we have a couple of minutes left, but I'm very curious for the aspiring writers out there to find out, what was your greatest challenge in writing? In the writing process.
So I'd written 2 novels before this.
And what were the names of them?
Well, I didn't even publish them.
Okay.
I mean, I wrote first drafts. So the biggest challenge back then in those first 2 novels was going back and rewriting, which I never had really honestly the desire to do. I wrote the thing and then I was like, I don't want to touch that again, because it was just, I knew I was going to have to go back and do a lot of work figuring out what the hell I'd been trying to say. You know what I mean? Like, it was going to be a lot of.
I know.
It was
it's
not,
relentless.
Yeah, it was. So this time around, I said to myself, all right, you don't want to have to go through that on the rewrite, and you want to write something that people will actually want to read and be entertaining, and you'll know what you're trying to say. So I actually spent 3 months of research and planning in advance, in outlining. I wrote a 60-page treatment for the novel. With basically, James Patterson writes out a very detailed treatment of all of his novels, where he describes in detail the action of each chapter. And so I did that, and I actually gave the treatment to some local people and some kids. A girl that I never met gave me the best feedback on that treatment. She's a girl who loves to read. She's the student of a friend of mine at a local high school in New Hampshire. And she came back with great notes, and her big note was, make her more heroic, make her stronger. I want to see her really strong. And so when I went back and actually wrote the book, I was like, she's going to be so strong at every point, where like her energy is going to be surging. She's going to have all of this energy. And it was because of that girl's feedback. I mean, it was because of what she said.
Wonderful, because you have completely captured those traits in your book. I found it a great read.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
And it's targeted. And who do you hope reads this book? The age, the.
Well, so young adult historical fiction. I will tell you that the most moving moment for me was when I got on the phone with my grandmother, who's 88. In Louisville, Kentucky, and I could tell she really meant it, told me how much she liked it. And I was very surprised that I was as touched by that as I was, but I really was very, very touched. And she's now sent it around to the people where she lives, and they're all World War II generation people in their 80s and 90s, and they're loving it.
Wonderful.
So I like to think, I have kids 9 and 10 years old who are reading it and loving it as well. So I'm hoping that anybody who likes a good story, will enjoy it.
Ben H. Robertson, author of The Last Generation. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
And we'll see you again the next time. Thanks for tuning in.